Ms. Nyman? Mrs. McWhorter?
Yes.
Present. Mr. Updegrove?
Here.
Mr. Hemingway?
Here.
Ms. Deeroff?
Present.
Ms. Hogan?
Present.
Mrs. Denon?
Here.
Mr. Brophy?
Here.
Mr. Foose?
Here.
Okay, next we'll do a pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, it looks like next the approval of our minutes. Motion by Ms. Werther, second by Ms. Hogan. We just go all in favor? Or?
Make sure you,
Oh.
Mike, can't hear you.
I'm sorry. So we had a motion by Ms. McWhorter and a second by Ms. Hogan.
You can do it. All in favor?
No, all in favor? Aye. It shows all aye. No nay. Okay, next we have a presentation. Corey Nelson is going to present. I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Bennett.
Karen, you need to turn your mic.
Yep.
Yep. See? Oh, there he is. Okay. You gotta come over to the mic. As shared earlier this afternoon, we have an opportunity to hear from Corey Nelson. We did receive a communication, I guess, from Ms. Reedy Jones that she would not be able to make it this evening, and that Corey Nelson will be doing the presentation. You received a lot of information in advance that we asked them to try to make it a little bit more of a conversation piece, so that we didn't have to go. They got it all last week. You don't have to go slide by slide. You can
Good.
go through the meat and potatoes of what it is you want us to be aware of,
Okay.
and if there's any ask of the committee, and then from there
Right.
they would talk about next steps if there's an ask.
Okay.
There is a section that, as you know, that gets specifically about what schools can do in the presentation, and some historical information that can happen. Mr. Hemingway did share with the board that this, for the public and the record on the video, that why are we entertaining this presentation, and it has economic and representation impact for the townships and the school district with regards to representation at state and federal level. Some people may not know that the number of seats you get at the federal level also are impacted by your population representation quite often. And then, of course, he articulated the monetary opportunities that may exist or be lost by not having appropriate counts in your jurisdiction. So this time, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Corey Nelson.
Okay, thank you. Nice to be here this evening. And I am a partnership specialist for the 2020 census. My coverage area is actually Berks and Schuylkill counties. Tricia is responsible for Montgomery County. And since you're one of those odd school districts that, kind of straddles both counties, but the information is relevant the same regardless of what county you live in. The difference, I'll talk a little bit about recruitment. There's a huge difference in pay rates for census takers, but that's about the only difference between the two. So if you'd like to go ahead and advance. It is 71 days until we celebrate Census Day, and that is April 1st. That is not the only day that people can respond to the census, but it is a benchmark for the census because we have to deliver to the president by December 31st, 2020, the census information so that they can make decisions about apportionment in the U.S. House of Representatives. Next. The mission of the Census Bureau is to serve as the leading source of quality data about the nation's people and economy. Okay. So why do we do the census? Actually, it is because it is mandated by the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2. The very first census, actually it was probably one of the first acts of government that the new founders embarked on, because they needed to know how many representatives needed to be apportioned in the House of Congress. So that's why the census began, and that's been probably the most significant reason for the census ever since then. This is our 23rd census, and this is actually going to be the first census where people can complete it online. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. We are promoting that the census is easy, safe, and important. Again, it's easy. This is the first census where people can actually complete it online, and about 95% of people will be invited to participate in the census. They'll get mailing to their residents. It'll have a code attached to it, and they can go online and complete the census that way. You don't need a code to complete it online. We have lots of partners, lots of libraries who are partnering with us, and other community-based organizations who are going to help their constituents complete it online. You can also complete it by phone or the traditional paper method. And it'll be available in 12 languages. English and Spanish will be available both online and in paper form. The other 11 languages will be available by phone. It's safe, and this is a critical one. Now, this is Tricia's PowerPoint. She really stressed the technological security that encompasses the 2020 census, which is incredibly important. But I also want to stress that all census employees are sworn. We take an oath of office our first day of employment. We have to protect the confidentiality of any personal data that we encounter, and we're sworn to that for life. If we violate that confidentiality, we could face up to $250,000 in fines and 5 years in prison. And I know I don't have that money, and I don't want to waste 5 years of my life in prison, so I certainly will take that oath to heart. Another important thing that people should know about the census is that we are not allowed to share that information with any other federal agency or law enforcement. So whatever the census takes in, it stays within the census. The purpose of the census is to provide statistical information only. So the data that we collect and we report to the public is in statistical form only. Okay. And it's important. I mentioned apportionment to the House of Representatives. It also determines redistricting. But I think for local community members, for the most part, it really determines about $675 billion of funds annually that gets dispersed from the federal government to states, counties, and to local municipalities. And literally, it impacts every part of life. You know, you can throw a stone and find something that, census data has an impact on in terms of funding, whether it's for schools, whether it's for infrastructure improvements, whether it's health care, you name it, census data covers it, and people use it to determine how to distribute those funds. I'm going to go ahead. I talked about how census data is used. What's not on the slides and what isn't really promoted by the census per se is Pennsylvania has a state complete count committee, and that was convened by Governor Wolf, and it includes stakeholders in PA who have a vested interest in ensuring that we get as complete a count as possible. And they ran the numbers, and they determined, they came up with a per capita figure of $2,093, and that is the amount of money per person that is lost to communities based on non-response. So, if you have, let's say, 1,000 people in your little town or wherever you live who decide not to respond to the census, that is $2,093 each year per those 1,000 people. That doesn't flow back into those communities, and that can add up to millions of dollars over a 10-year period. So it is absolutely critical that local communities and counties and states embrace the census and try to get as many people counted as possible. Sure. Per person. Yes, yes. So it doesn't take many people not completing the census to make an impact. Yep. Right, right. And that, I mean, and again, that's
Just one
not
second,
like,
please. I
I'm
have to
sorry.
remind each board member because he can't, he's raising his hand. I need you to make sure you recognize by the chair and turn on your mic so that he can capture your comments on, thank you.
And that, I mean, that is not an official census number. That comes from the Pennsylvania State Complete Count Committee. But I think it does put things into perspective if people really need to know the financial impact of an undercount. So, yes.
And as our last meeting, I think we looked up the Boyertown School District, and it, as of the last census, there was a 17% who didn't reply.
Mhm.
So that's a lot of money left on the table.
Yeah, that is what, I have a couple screenshots of what's called the low response map, and you get an idea of those areas where we're predicting to have some of the lowest responses. So, okay. We can skip that one. So the 2020 census,
I have a
oh, I'm sorry,
question
yes,
that he just
I'm sorry.
recognized.
Yes.
You know, hearing that number and giving the challenges that we often talk about budgetary-wise, as we go farther into this, I mean, I looked at it, but I didn't know the context of it. Is there some action item that you're going to suggest to us on how we can actually address that 17%? Because that's a lot of
Yes.
money.
It
And
is
I
a
need
lot of
all
money.
of it we
It
can
is.
get.
And it
it'll come
really,
later?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and it's actually at the end of the presentation. So if you need me, I'm going to cut through a lot of this.
Okay, all right.
So don't worry about it.
That's a lot of money.
We'll,
when I
we'll
hear
get to
17%.
it. Yeah. There is a section in Reading where it's 34%, and that actually is the highest low response score in Berks County. So.
So just for clarification, I was curious, is that figure representative of all services, or are we talking strictly public school funding?
That's all services.
Okay, just,
Mhm.
thank you.
Yep. Okay. Our goal is to count each person once, only once, and in the right place. And I can tell you operationally, we have 3 activities that are going on. One is the self-response, and that's the biggest one, where people will get the invitation to respond, and they can, self-enumerate. We also have 2 other operations, and it's called group quarters, and that's where we actually work with like nursing homes, prisons, colleges, any place where people live in groups, but that they're not a single household. We work with resident administrators to get that data. So they actually will provide the information about who's living in those group quarters to us. And then we have what's called service-based enumeration, and that is the way to count people who who live in transitional living situations or are transient, people who experience homeless, who don't have a permanent residence. We work with the local communities to figure out where those areas are, where people who don't have permanent homes are staying, and we actually have enumerators who will go out over a 3-day period and count those people. They will go face to face and count them. So those are the 3 big operations that encompass the 2020 census. Yes. Yes. They're part of the group quarters as well.
Oh, they are?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
They're springing up all over.
Yep, we try, and that's one way that we partner, is to figure out where are these locations, like the group quarters, any of the temporary locations where people might be living. So, that is one possible way we partner with communities. Yes.
How does it play out with our other issue for the school district is obviously dealing with our homeless. When that's been in every school district I've been in, how does that play out in this process with regards to making sure they're counted? Because people think of homelessness as an image of someone on the street.
Right, and
But that's not
true.
necessarily
Right. Mhm.
always the case.
Right,
And quite
right.
often, in my 17 years as superintendent and 27 in education,
Mm-hmm.
I have a number of homeless students who in school, and you would never have known it.
Exactly, exactly.
So I guess will some of that come out later and how we can
Right.
make sure that they count?
Well, if you want, I can dive right into it if you'd like.
Well,
if
I'm
you'd
just
like
trying.
to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my probably challenges, good or bad, is there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking, what is it that we can do differently? Because
Right.
some of those students walk into our schools,
Right.
and how do we help make sure they get counted also? Because there's a likelihood that when they go back, they're probably going to get missed. So if
Right,
we don't facilitate
right.
something while they're in school,
Right.
which is their best chance to get them counted.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So. Okay. You can- I did talk about this. 95% of households will get an invitation. There is a 5% who get face-to-face. Most notably, last week, the 21st, the deputy director of the census went to Alaska, and they would do that face-to-face because they have to do it while the ground's still frozen. So they actually go face-to-face. So there are some populations, very small, that we do face-to-face enumeration with still. So, okay. So in addition to the letter to respond, the census, through all of its mapping tools and other surveys it's done, knows that there are pockets of communities that they either don't have good computer access, they don't have internet access, so they will get both an invitation with that code to complete the survey online, and they'll also get a paper questionnaire. And that's also split out. If there are communities where it's primarily Spanish language, they will get those letters and the questionnaires in Spanish as well. So, okay. And here's a timeline of what the census will actually look like. Beginning mid-March is when people will start receiving those invitations in the mail to respond. They will get several more reminders between then and April. If they don't respond by then, by the end of April, that's when the census takers start going out and knocking on doors. So they'll get a list of addresses that they need to follow up with, and they'll go out and they'll knock on doors to try to get people to complete the census. The 2020 census questionnaire, we often get questions, what's on the census? Actually, it's very short. Will take about 10 minutes to complete. There are 10 questions. And the questions encompass your living situation. Do you rent where you live? Are you a homeowner? What's your age? What are the ages of the people who live with you? How many people live with you? What's their ages? What's their date of birth? What's your race and what's your ethnicity? And what are the relationships of the people who live with you? So that's basically all the information. And they also request a telephone number in case they need to follow up with you. So there's no financial data is required, social security numbers, no banking information, nothing personal like that. Okay. We talked about, we can skip that one. We can skip that one. Okay, this is the good one. We talked about the low response score. I think Mr. Hemingway mentioned Boyertown's is 17%. And while that's certainly not the lowest, it's still, if you live in this community, it's 70% of your people who are predicted to not respond to the census. So you want to try to get lower that response score so that you can get more people to participate. So if you want to go to the next slide, and I apologize, I took a screenshot off of the program that we use, and you can look at, I guess you have looked at it yourself. The census has a program, a mapping tool called ROAM, Response Outreach Area Mapper. And you can drill down, to your zip code and see, what your census tract is and what the predicted low response score is for your community. And if you can see Berks County, that little cluster of really dark blue, that's the city of Reading and surrounding. So that's where we have the most concern that people are not going to respond. If you go to the next slide. And there's Boyertown. You were kind of out southeast, little blob down at the end. You're at 17.3%. And this data is based off of the 5-year American Community Survey from 2013 to 2017, and based on those responses. So based on that, the census figures that there's about 17% of the people who live in Boyertown who will not respond to the census. And looking a little deeper at the numbers, sometimes you can look and see, okay, you know, if there's a large immigrant population, a large population that has limited English proficiency, that kind of rings bells and says, okay, I understand why there's probably a low response. With Boyertown, it's not that obvious. I discerned that because there's a high number of rental properties in Boyertown, and that there's also a significant number of children in Boyertown as well. So that could impact, you know, who responds and how they respond. And those are all ways that I think school districts can help impact, you know, especially the counting of children. So these are some of our hard to count demographics. Children under 5 comes up first. They are notoriously hard to count. Many times with, you know, the way most kids live, they may be split between residents. They may live with grandma and grandpa. They may be living in foster care. People don't think the newborn that was just born, you know, was a week old. They don't think to count that newborn as well. So, you know, children under 5 are very hard to count. College students, I just did a presentation at Kutztown University. They're young. You know, I asked the question, I said, who remembers the 2010 census? And nobody did. So, you know, they don't even know what the census is. And now they're at a point in their lives where they may be living on their own, and they'll get this in the mail, and they'll look at it and they'll say, I'm not going to fill this out. So making sure that they complete the census is critical. And then, you know, you have some, and I mentioned renters because they're mobile, they tend to move around a lot, they're not reliable when it comes to completing the census. And you can look at all the other, you know, factors that impact, you know, who's likely to not complete the census. Okay. We can skip the complete count committee. Okay, statistics in schools. You're talking about ways that school districts can help support getting more people counted. Statistics in Schools is a free program that's available to school districts. It was actually developed by teachers for teachers. And they are lesson plans that are available for pre-K through 12. Teachers can select to just integrate these lesson plans into their current lessons. It teaches statistical literacy along with awareness of the census. And then there's information that the kids can actually take home to parents so that they're aware of the census and hopefully are more likely to complete it. So that's kind of a formal national initiative that's going on that schools can take part in. But I think, you know, Dr. Bedden, to your point about, you know, what specifically can the Boyertown School District do to, you know, get those kids counted. You mentioned the kids who are experiencing homelessness. What the Census Bureau is looking for is those trusted community voices. So some communities use what's called ambassadors. So if there's somebody who those kids really relate to, whether it's a guidance counselor, a teacher, you know, maybe taking, you know, some extra time with some of those kids that you know might fall through the cracks, and, you know, figuring out, you know, how do we get them engaged to take the census or get their family to take the census. Other partners may open up, I know our libraries, for example, are opening up their doors and allowing people to use the library resources, their computers, to complete the census online. All I can say is outreach, and figuring out who in your community represent those hard to count people and figuring out what is the best way to reach them. For my part, as the partnership specialist, and for Tricia's part as well, we can provide you with tools and materials that can allow you to complete some outreach, whether it's, you know, flyers, digital stories. We have things that you can post on your website, on your Facebook pages. Those are kind of the traditional things that we have available. So, and again, that kind of is a good segue of how people can support. And I don't want to ignore the Complete Count Committee. I mentioned that the state of Pennsylvania has one. Most counties have. Montgomery County has a Complete Count Committee. Berks County has one as well. And then, local communities also have Complete Count Committees. I'm working with Tamaqua and Schuylkill County. And then you might have like a group of community-based organizations who have their own Complete Count Committee. And then they really kind of take on the role of determining if they have a specific, let's take, people experiencing homelessness. You may have organizations that come together that work with homeless communities and devise strategies to outreach to them. So, and I think, go ahead. And I just want to mention something about hiring. I know in particular, Boyertown is a community where we are really low on recruits for census takers. So I wanted to do a plug for, if you know anybody who is interested in working for the census, census takers will work on average for about 8 weeks. It's temporary work. It's part-time. In Montgomery County, it pays $27 an hour. So if you live in Montgomery County and you want to work and do census work in Montgomery County, you can make $27 an hour. In Berks County, it's $19.50 an hour, which still is not shabby for a part-time gig. It would be for the census taker to actually go around and do the door-to-door knocking. People could actually help with some of our other operations. Yes, Brian.
The age requirement.
You have to be at least 18. Yep. Yes.
So these census takers, you're saying they're going to go door to door.
Yes.
And are they just going to be reminding people, or are they actually, because
They're going to be asking them to do the census.
asking them to do the
Yeah.
census? So if they knock on their door and they say, "Oh, I've already done it," then they just leave, or
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
okay.
And they'll double check because they're going to get a list of addresses, and that's going to be based on people who have not completed the census. So
to date.
Right,
Okay,
to
so
that
they're
date.
going to be going after a
Right.
couple of weeks after they've gotten it.
Right.
So then they're going to go out and basically follow up with people.
Exactly,
With what they're doing.
And they will have, they're actually going to use handheld devices, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet, so they'll actually stand there with a person and they'll complete it. So our census takers are really the ones who have to abide by that confidentiality because they are going to be working directly with people and collecting information. So an important thing too is, all the census takers will have identification on them. Another thing is to educate the public about who are your census takers, what do they look like, what can you expect. Those are some other ways that communities can support that as well. So, yeah, oh,
Why such a big discrepancy in the salary for counties?
I think because Montgomery is, I think it's a much tougher county for whatever reason. And also cost of living as well. So, some of the other parts of Montgomery, yeah, yep.
I was just going to ask if, and I can, I guess, do I email Trish, the electronic stuff we can help you with. If you also send us information that we can share with some of our students who are 18, we can get it over to, because that's a nice little
Sure,
opportunity for them to
sure,
make some money.
absolutely. We can
And
do
then,
that.
I guess, would she be the one that I could get what the classroom stuff looks like to share with teaching, learning, to see? I would tell you, I prefer to find a way that it's not in addition to, so we
I
don't
know,
add
I
another
know.
layer onto our teachers.
Right,
But
no,
if,
I get that.
Teaching and learning can look at it and see how we can help them incorporate
Sure.
it into one of our courses. Then
Sure.
We can look at it and do that.
Okay, I can do one up with you too. The BCIU is part of the Berks Complete Count Committee, and I'm working with Dr. Fohl. She's already identified curriculum for each age group. So, I can send you the whole thing, but she's identified that might make things easier.
No, if
So-
there's a person there, then we'll work through them. That's fine.
Okay, yeah, I can send that
I
to you
think,
as well.
Mike, you might want to come up to the mic so they can pick you up on the.
I have curriculum coordinators on Friday and work with Christina Full directly.
great. Cool.
So I can get that information, but I'm wondering if we can have access to this presentation, and we have leadership team meeting tomorrow. I could share it with them.
Yep,
That'd be
absolutely.
awesome.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. So yes, and that's, so really, we absolutely need, and recruitment, they're like gangbusters. They have particular goals that they need to meet, and they really are trying to get as many people hired as possible, probably through February. What takes so long is the background check through the federal government. I know it took 2 months for me. I got my initial offer. I think they're speeding it up with the census takers, trying to do that. But so if people can, if they're interested, spread the word. They don't need to have a resume. They don't need to have a high school education. They just need to be 18. They need to be able to get around in their community. They don't have to have a driver's license, but they need to get where they're assigned to work. Hours are very flexible. So people can work, if they have a full-time job and they want to supplement their income, they can do that as well. So. Okay, and I think if you want to, yep, I think we're basically done. Yep, we're done.
I have 2 questions. One, I'm not sure if somebody else might need to answer or not. First one is, how soon can people, if online is an option, how soon can people log on and start?
That is a very good question. That mid-March is when the invitations will come out. People will not be able to log on until that actually goes live. So.
And then my second question was, I understand that the school district actually has an obligation to review post-census data and population density and dynamics and things of that nature. Is that something that you're able to speak to at all, or is that something somebody else might? Could be a future topic, or okay. What do school districts, to your knowledge, do with the data after the census is completed?
I'm not quite sure what school districts do with it specifically. I just know that it's made based on population dynamics. I know if people write grants, census data is critical. To the grants and justifying need for funds. So, yeah. And I know it influences, and she doesn't have it in this slide, but like the free lunch program, different grants that come down to schools, the census data impacts all of that stuff. So. And.
I would just like to say that this influences our community, and they are a partner in this school district. I mean, it is a one Boyertown, all the way down to the townships. They benefit, and I think it's everyone's obligation in this district to make sure that this count is as accurate as it can be, so that we're representative properly, and that we are receiving available funds that could be due to us, not just as a school district, but as our communities. This is our home. We live here. We want to make this the best place that it possibly can be.
And to your point, there isn't one area that census data doesn't hit. And you may have gotten it, there's a one-page flyer that has 50 reasons or 50 ways that census data is used. And you can look on that, and there is something in there for everyone. So it is critically important that people complete that census. And there's a finite amount of money that's available. So, the more people you count, the more, bless you, the more likely, you can take advantage of those finite resources. So, okay. Any other questions for me?
Can I just recognize Donna Savage? She's a past board, and she did. She and I reached out to you guys to initiate some conversation, and I would like to allow her to be part of our presentation if she has any comments or anything that she would like to say, other than public comment period. I'd like to include you in the actual presentation.
Thanks. I was going to do public comment because I know you have the opportunity to talk again after that. But Mr. Hemingway met Tricia Reedy Jones at a local community event in the fall, and then between the two of us, we arranged to meet with Corey and Tricia and learn a little bit about it and a lot about what you heard tonight. And we brainstormed a little bit of ways that the school district could really help and things that we could do. And we talked about some of them. Dr. Bedden is picking up on some of it, the curriculum piece and getting our kids involved. We also thought about one big idea was to host a community presentation like this for our community on behalf of us, but also on behalf of all 10 municipalities, because they benefit from this too. And we saw it as possibly a way, like a one Boyertown opportunity to bring everyone together. And maybe we host the location because we've got great venues to host something like this. And we bring the people from all the municipalities and they advertise it with their constituents and try to benefit our entire community and help people understand. Another thing that wasn't brought up, we should be able to be using our website and our social media avenues to help promote the census, and Dr. Bedden made a comment about that. I think we can also be engaging our students somehow in helping with the complete count, whether we use the Student Government Association or the FBLA or Student Council, but those folks use it as a learning opportunity for them and a service opportunity for them. So I think there's some opportunities there. And then one person asked what our school district does. One thing that you will do, because state code mandates that you do this, is because we have a 3 voting region school district, every 10 years after this census, so in early 2021, you are required to look at the population across the 3 regions and ensure that it's as equal across those regions as you can. And you're mandated to use the U.S. Census data to do that. So another reason to make sure that we're not undercounting in any place. So those were some ideas for how we came up, and I'd love to hear all of you discuss and maybe come up with a plan. I'd love if you want to do some sort of a event and bring in all the municipalities, I'd be happy to help as well as a volunteer. Thanks.
So just a comment, I think Dr. Bedden and Mrs. Savage's point about using the school district and getting information to the students is very helpful, because I think you know, we all know that the kids' opinions are very influenced obviously by their parents at home and what they think and what they hear about at home, and then some of that is brought to school. But I think it also works the other way. And I think that if our students are hearing in school, this is really important, and and go home and at the dinner table say, did you sign us? Did you count us? Did you count us? I think that could have an influence on parents at home if their kids are bringing it home, and whether we do something at the high school on the school news, make sure you're counted, or do a communication to all of our parents through the school. So I think anything that we can do to ensure that people in our community are counted, and going through the schools is a really easy way to do it, especially the part about that you were mentioning about, newborns and parents. And I'm sure you have a newborn baby, filling out the census probably isn't high on your list. So I can see how people say, oh, I'm going to do it, and then they don't just take that 2 minutes to fill it out. They just don't do it. So I think if we can continue in school, do what we can, whether it's incorporating something in the curriculum, or sending, an email blast, or putting a flyer out so people understand. I love the community idea. I think we should send a flyer that says, you're worth $2,093, please come to this. But, just to somehow get that message out. And I think that we, as a district, can probably help with that.
excuse me, just to follow up on Mrs. Dennon's comments. During the 2010 census, I had 2 young children in school. They did like a school-wide census, and it was a big push to educate children about the census. My children were so excited, and they were both 2 boys, which it's hard to get boys excited about much. But they were pretty excited. They were so excited that they came home and we filled out the census together so they could see where I listed them and everything. So that was really a great opportunity, which if it hadn't been for school, I would have just filled it out and sent it in and not even thought to include my kids in it. So.
Okay, my next comment would be, okay, we heard the what, so now how do we do the how? So I'm gonna leave that to your,
I thought I hit, are predominantly administrative, so unless there's a reason the board feels uncomfortable, then, as Mr. Stout said, he will go ahead and connect with the IU since they are already meeting with them to get the curricular stuff and look at it. I just would tell to the board that, so he's sitting here, what we will do is what we can do with regards to not making it an add-on. So if it becomes an add-on, I don't want to make teachers feel like there's one more thing we got to do, and try to make sure, come on up and incorporate it. And they say that actually is the design that they have that can be incorporated into the process. I will meet with Allison and then reach out to Tricia and get the electronic stuff. That's not hard.
okay.
That's easy that we can do and push out using our social media sites and our webpage and those types of things. And then we'll also, I think, try to use that to incorporate any of our students, because I think that the 1950, 27, whatever it is, if it works, that's still good money for an 18-year-old student.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as Dr. Bedden made reference to, Christina Full is an excellent BCIU resource that we have. In fact, from our comprehensive planning process, she was critical in helping support us. How good of a resource she is. I emailed her 10 minutes ago, and I just got a response that quickly because I used to work with her at Wilson, but we'll let that go in the back on the other side of this. But for instance, from census.gov, 3 separate resources she gave as opportunities for 3rd grade using fractions to compare amusement parks by states. In grade 8, an example would be persuasive writing about race and ethnicity is a topic that has a link here, and also in 9th and 10th grade To Kill a Mockingbird. So as Dr. Bedden stated, not add more to the plate, but how do we embed it in our practices within the classroom? I'm speculating that there could be other activities that are connected.
On that point, I think it's great when we can incorporate relevant current events like that into topics that we're already discussing with the kids. It makes it a little more impactful for them, and it gives them some context about how this can be used in their life. So
Yes.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so I just want to clarify, I don't know if this has to, no?
If it's administrative, no. Unless you have an objection to what I said, there's nothing for you to do.
No, I just want to clarify that the board is giving the direction to pursue this within the administration to, at their discretion, work on this.
Thank you.
I included you in the presentation at that time.
I did. I want to make one more. Okay, so Donna Savage from Upper Frederick Township. Just the idea about having a presentation for the community. I didn't really hear that discussed. I think it's up to you guys if you have the appetite to put the energy into doing something like that. But I would ask you to talk a little bit about that. Thanks.
Is that anything we should talk about now, or is that something that is brought up later? Just explain to me what the next process would be if that's something the board would want to consider.
I think the way I would word the question is, if it's something you want to consider, then I would include that conversation with Ms. Moyer about some ideas, and then send that to the board just to kind of say, give you an idea of the format and just respond to that. So, I mean, it's because at the end of the day, we're going to be the ones going to put it together anyway if you want to do it. It may be the board's hosting it, but we would end up probably designing, because you don't have a staff designing it for you and doing it. So if it's something you want us to consider putting together, we can submit a concept to you and then get your feedback.
As far as advertising for students to get involved in it, would you be interested in putting signage up in the school to get the students, when they walk in, signage are going to draw them into it. Maybe the number at the top, the price would be a good incentive.
So the answer would be the format of advertising would work with the high school administration, but they have the display panels all throughout the school, so we absolutely, I would think that would be part of it. Obviously, one of the best tools that you're referring to is putting that dollar value up there to attract their attention, and then work with them. Yeah. To target the students because there's only a small population that will qualify, obviously, and so we'll work with them and target the senior sponsors most likely to collaborate on how to get that information to those students to make them aware of it.
Yes, would this be a presentation that Ms. Nelson, Corey Nelson, and that they would give, and we would just sponsor?
Yes.
Okay.
From my understanding, yes.
So it's just, I'm not sure how we would go about putting that forward.
Well, I think you would basically request that it be done and get some consensus from your colleagues right here to say you'd like to do that. So if you're sure, then we'll just go ahead and start working with her to plan it. Because there's no you can't vote here. It's just a matter of saying that consensus that you'd like the administration to try to follow with her about trying to put something together. And again, Ms. Moyer would be the point as a communications person to try to coordinate with her and talk about the proper venue, to plan a night, what it would look like, location.
So, like the school district does something similar with that financial aid night. They always do it in January, and they advertise it. So that's more geared towards, parents of kids at the high school. But I would envision if we're sponsoring it because we're opening up our space, like the high school auditorium, and we would just be the sponsor, and then I think that you would just advertise it like we would advertise anything else that we were doing, and say, hey, the Boyertown Area School District is sponsoring a night to find out about the census, and then we would probably put a flyer in at the multi-service and those different big organizations that you can put it in church bulletins. I know I was at a board meeting in Pottstown prior to this, and we were talking about the importance of the census in Pottstown because of the Pottstown cluster being there, and they were talking about that, and one of the things that the cluster board is going to do is they have all the area ministers and pastors come a couple of times a month, and so they're having at their meeting with those folks, they're having the census. I think it's a Montgomery County person or somebody's coming to do the presentation there, so then they can disseminate that information to their churches. So I think if we just kind of can be the host site and sponsor it, then it would be up, like Dr. Bedden said, it would be up to Mrs. Moyer and the administration to kind of get the advertising out about it.
On the topic of hosting some type of presentation, I guess I'm struggling a little bit to think of who the audience might be that would actually be motivated to come out to learn about the census. I mean, I think getting information out to people is important. I think there are a lot of different avenues to do that that we can help facilitate as a school district. But I'd be curious, I mean, and others obviously may disagree. I just don't know if it'll draw the number of people that might warrant actually having that type of event. But if we were to consider having something along those lines or hosting something along those lines, I would like to think that we would try to partner with all the different townships and see if they could help support and promote something along those lines, because that would really be the only way I think it would be as impactful, is if we actually spoke with each of the different the management of each of the townships and said, hey, we're looking to do this would benefit you as well, so can you help us either promote it or get the word out or support it in those types of ways.
I would think our main audience would be the township officials, perhaps our reps, and use those as receive all the information. We're all on board, and then they can branch out and enter into their individual communities as far as whether they, what they're going to put on their websites, what they want to talk about in their township meetings. So open to the public, but I think our select target audience should be some of the decision makers in the community, who from there can then branch out and spread the good news.
Okay. Yeah, that actually sounds. That sounds like. I mean, I think that particular audience might be more compelled to come out. So, and that wasn't what I was thinking. So that's good clarification. And the other thing I wanted to mention was as far as people that might be interested in signing up to do this type of work. 'Cause obviously, it's seasonal, part-time, or it's not a full-time position. That it wouldn't just necessarily be students. Getting the information to students, they might have an older brother, they might have a parent or a grandparent that is looking to. So even getting that information out to our students doesn't necessarily mean that just students would be interested. I think it's good for us to get that information out to them, though.
No, I was going to agree with Brandon that, yeah, I think we need to target our audience, families and students, parents, they could come, but I really think it should be community leaders, whether, as Jill said, from some of the churches or Boyertown Multi-Services and the townships. Those are the people that really, I know Earl has a township newsletter that goes out quarterly or once a year, twice a year, but yeah, we need to focus on the community leaders.
Okay, Dr. Benson, so do you need a motion from us to tell you to go ahead forward with this, to come up with some sort of method how you're going to go forward with this? I don't know if you need one or not. If you do, I'll give you one. Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Now, at this point, it seems like you're all on board.
We are on.
All right, obviously something that we can continue to discuss as this process goes down the line. We'll look forward to seeing, what this leads to and what opportunities this brings to us. So I know we're coming up a little over an hour now, so not to push us along too much, but I just want to take the opportunity now, if any additional board comments. Anybody? If we're going to go there, we'll move to any announcements. Do we have any further announcements? This meeting next week, okay. I guess I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Mr. Foose? Seconded by Ms. McWhirler. All in? Adjourn. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Don.